Welcome back to Discovery Lab Online. I'm Erica, and today we're going to explore the exciting history of World War II food provisioning and show you how people in the 1940s adapted to not having access to their favorite foods. I'm also going to try to make a couple of these recipes, and it's important to note before I start that these are not going to be the most delicious recipes you've ever seen, but they undoubtedly helped the war effort, and they showed how people in the United States made culinary sacrifices in times of crisis. But before we get to those recipes, we need to understand the historical context that made these rations a reality. And that starts all the way back in 1941. After the US formally entered World War II in 1941, Americans had to adapt to new limitations as a result of wartime food shortages. There were food shortages for a couple of reasons. Certain products like butter, canned milk, and sugar were diverted to the war effort overseas. There were also food shortages because trade disruptions that were caused by the war limited the United States from getting all of the products it normally would have. At first, Americans were just discouraged from using too much sugar, over drinking coffee, or eating too much meat. But these weren't formal requirements in 1941. Even though these requirements weren't formalized, they were strongly encouraged in order to make sure that troops overseas had enough supplies. If a family didn't ration, they were at risk of being seen as unpatriotic. As the war raged on, things got even more serious in terms of food shortages. What started as informal recommendations turned into formal requirements. In 1942 and 1943, the Office of Price Administration began rolling out a points value rationing program. This points value system assigned families a set number of monthly points for things like butter, fats, sugar, and most drastically, meat. Here's what one of these rationing books would have looked like. Because these important ingredients were now heavily limited, people had to find ways to make their rations last, which often meant finding creative recipes that they wouldn't have considered before. In Paris, Texas, they had regular competitions to see who could come up with the best victory recipe, ones that were best adapted to the shortages of the time. The first prize winner for this one particular week in 1943 was Mrs. Lloyd Gandel, who presented her simple recipe for rice and cheese patties. The recipe calls for 2 cups cooked rice, 3 to 4 grated cheese. It doesn't give a unit, but I'm going to assume the author means cups, and 1 egg. I beat the egg thoroughly, added to the rice and cheese, and mixed it together well. I then rolled it in breadcrumbs. Since the title was called Rice and Cheese Patties, I tried to make them sort of into a patty shape. After that, I fried them on the stove until they were golden brown. These probably ended up a little bigger than what was originally intended in the recipe, so they were a little bit difficult to make, and they don't necessarily look as pretty as they could have, but they still turned out fairly tasty. Now, even though these little fried cheese patties were delicious, they certainly weren't the most nutritious meal possible, and the USDA started to get worried that people would develop nutritional deficiencies given all of the rationing requirements. Because of this, they encouraged people to grow something called a victory garden. A victory garden was a simple backyard garden where people were encouraged to grow all sorts of vegetables like carrots, lettuce, kale, beans, corn, cucumbers, broccoli, spinach, essentially any vegetable that was easy to grow given where you lived. These were all vitamin-rich foods, and they helped people get the nutrients they needed when rationing made getting a lot of vitamins difficult. The campaign to promote Victory Gardens was pretty successful. Historians estimate that by 1943, up to 20 million Victory Gardens were planted. People certainly ate these vegetables in usual ways, like boiling them or eating them raw. But after a while, different companies started publishing recipes that would show how their products could make rationing easier and more fun. Tons of different companies used this technique, but no one did it more famously than Knox Gelatin. The example that I'm using today was published in the Fort Worth Star-Telegram in 1943 and was called the Victory Salad Special, which involves encasing Victory Garden vegetables inside of gelatin. To make this recipe, I first softened 1 envelope of Knox Gelatin in 1/4 cup cold water. I waited a minute or so, then added 1 cup of hot water to dissolve the gelatin. I then added 1/4 cup vinegar, 1 tablespoon lemon juice, 2 tablespoons sugar, half a teaspoon salt, and a dash of pepper. I let it cool for a bit, and then when it started to thicken, I added the vegetables, which is just a mixture of some lettuce, broccoli, carrots, cabbage. I then put it into different molds. I don't usually deal with gelatin, so I don't have any dedicated Jell-O molds, but I just put them into some small cups that I had. Once they're firm, they're done. The recipe says to add them to a desired dressing, but there's absolutely nothing desirable about the scenario, so I'm not doing that. So, how can you implement these rationing techniques at home? You could always use products that are readily available in your supermarkets. You could get creative with your recipes, worry more about nutrition than flavors, and you could even plant your own Victory Gardens at home. Just please, if you do decide to grow your own vegetables, take it from me, do not encase them in gelatin. There's definitely more delicious ways to prepare your vegetables. Thanks for watching Discovery Lab Online. If you have any suggestions for future videos, leave them in the comments below or send them to questions@fwmsh.org. If you want to support us, remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel and leave a like on this video to let us know you'd like to see more science and history content. Thanks for watching.